How can he read it back to you?
Because he's memorized.
Okay.
It's mnemonics.
Yeah.
All ancient writing is memorized.
Yeah.
That's the point. These guys are pretty quick with their minds, but it's written on the paper, so he gets it back exactly. The point is that when he reads it back, guess what he's adding in? The inflections, the punctuation, the sentences. You see, these things aren't invented yet. These haven't been invented yet. There's no commas. There's no sentences. There's no spaces between the words. These aren't invented. He has to add them in because he's memorized what you told him, you see? And so he reads it back. Exactly. Now what he does is he makes 3 copies of the completed version, 3 copies. And you call your person who's going to deliver the message. And guess what you do? He takes a copy, you take a copy, you read it to the person in the perfect inflection, the graphius, whatever. The guy who's a Greek guy that wrote it for you takes it home, he keeps a copy. The guy who's going to deliver your message with your mnemonics, who memorized it from you, takes his, and you keep yours. So Paul sends Timothy or Epaphroditus or whoever to go give this message to some other group, right? And when he gets there, he has it, and he has the mnemonics in front of him. He's already memorized it, and what does he do? He reads it with a perfect inflection, all the breaks that you're supposed to have. By the way, in the synagogues, ancient Hebrew has no vowels. Luckily, Greek has vowels, thank God. But ancient Hebrew has no vowels, and everything is the same. No spaces, no punctuation, no sentences, no paragraphs, nothing. And so guess what? There's 2 readers, 2 guys beside you as you're reading in the synagogue to make sure that you don't get it wrong. And they beat you if you do. No, they just help you to make sure you get it right. And probably in early Christian churches, reading Greek, it was the same way. Because that's what they've always done in the synagogue. So, do you see this? Ancient documents are mnemonics. Are mnemonics. You memorize them to read them. The world started to change when, well, and let me talk about this for a second. How much do you think a scroll costs in the ancient world? The cost of a medieval document, a book. Books were invented because of the New Testament, but a medieval codex from about 1200 to 1400 would cost, a book would cost the same as a 40-acre estate. We know that scrolls were available in the marketplace in Athens. How much did they cost? Lots. Very expensive. Shows how wealthy the people were. The focus in Greek, the focus in English, the focus in Greek is a logical argument. The focus of English, we write English as intro, body, and conclusion, right? I hope you do. That's what your grammar teachers told you to write. So if you're not, you need to fix. But in English, we write intro, body, conclusion. In Hebrew, we write parallelism, a synopsis, body. So people tell me all the time, oh, did you know there's 2 Genesis stories? Well, duh. It's synopsis, body. There's always going to be a synopsis and then a body. So you'll see 2 Noah stories, 2 creation stories. That's the way Hebrews wrote. That's the way ancient Hebrew is written. If you don't understand it, it means you don't understand ancient Hebrew. Greek is a logical argument to a telos, roughly a conclusion. A logos to telos is what we call it. It is a simple body. You'll never find an intro. You should never find an intro in Greek. You should never find body and conclusion in Greek, because that's not the way it is. You guys remember the Socratic dialogues they forced you to read when you were in high school and college? Didn't they really upset you because there was no intro, body, or conclusion? It was just like body, right? That's what it is. Acts is the same way. Although Acts does have a little intro, which is interesting, because we usually don't find that in Greek documents. The use of language is a direct result of a culture. So it's very important to understand a culture. Culture is critical. Just like language is critical, right? You want to understand if you want to understand a book that's written in a foreign language, a different language, an ancient language, you got to understand a language a little bit, right? If you want to understand that time, you got to understand the culture. The culture is an established royal monarchy. The simple seven assembly machines are in use. I won't go over that. They got domestication of animals and plants. It's established agrarian. I won't go into great detail on that. Established literacy. We saw it. It is slavery-based. All cultures. Give me this. All cultures until the 1800s. All cultures until the 1800s are slavery-based. All cultures. Okay. About 2/3 of the people in Athens are slaves. You always said 2/3, mostly women. Just the way the world is. The position of women and children. Look, women in the Greek culture and also in the Hebrew culture, we're talking about Greco-Roman culture. I'll show you your Greco-Hebraic, Greco-Roman, 1st century, okay? Women are kept in the gynoeceum, the place for women in the house. Women have their own entrance. The women have their own place. Women are not allowed outside the gynoeceum in a house when another free man is in the house. Only the husband, owner, is allowed into the gynoeceum as a man. Why? Protection. You know, people want to say, oh, they're a patriarchal society. Yeah, they are a patriarchal society. Guess what? A woman on the streets, what's going to happen to her? She's going to be raped. She's going to be kidnapped. She's going to be killed. Because that's the way the world works. Okay? If you are not protected by men, you're toast. And guess what? If men aren't protected by themselves or others, they're going to have trouble. Because might makes right. There is rule of law beginning because of the Romans. But who's keeping the law for you? You got policemen? No. The way it works in the Greek culture is you got demi. You got a demi, which is your tribe or your group in a political sense. And if you're having a problem, guess what you do? You start screaming. And guess what? Your demi comes to help you. Your neighbors, right? But in our country, in the modern world, we call the police. There ain't no police in the ancient world. So might makes right. So, you know, don't look at this. Look at it as the culture. Okay? And let me tell you, if I were a woman or a child, or even a weak man, okay, in a culture like this, I'd sure like to be protected. Because I don't want to be going out on the street and getting abused, beaten, or whatever, you know. And literally, might makes right in these cultures. So you got to understand it. You got to I always say you got to take off your cultural blinders, because we got these terrible cultural blinders, makes it us unable to see what the world was like. So we need to put ourselves, and what I did with my last class, and I should have probably done it in this class too, I said, imagine yourself as a person in a Greek society. Okay? First of all, there would be no women here, because women were kept away from, separate, and secure. And guess what? If you weren't kept separate and secure, guess what you were? You were a whore. Yeah, you were a prostitute. High or low, doesn't matter. You were a prostitute. And you didn't have any rights. So, rough world. Very rough world. Let's talk about numbers, fingers and toes. It's very important to note, why does it say 40 days and 40 nights in the Old Testament? 40 days and 40 nights is a euphemism for more than I can count. Why 40?
Fingers and toes.
Well, how many people I got to have 40? Two. Buyer and seller. Isn't that special? So 40 days and 40 nights is the most that two people in a bartering culture can count to. They used consonants for the numbers. And guess what you can't do in Greek and Roman? Well, Roman's really bad. Roman, the constants, right? Greek, the same thing. Constants are used for the numbers. You can't multiply and divide. You have to use tables. And it's really hard to add and subtract. Anybody ever tried to add and subtract Roman numerals? Okay? That's true of almost everything. Matter of fact, when Jesus makes a comment, 70 times 70, that means that's a euphemism in Greek for eternity. Because for infinite. Because you can't multiply. The only way to multiply 70 times 7 is to make 70 times 7 tick marks, which is really hard. It takes a long time. Somebody might, walk on it before you even add it up. So without an Arabic base, it's almost impossible to do multiplication, division, etc., etc. This is the way the world is. People telling time. Until 1300 BC and BC, the sundial was invented by the Egyptians in that period. They divided the world into 10 hours of daylight, 2 hours of twilight, and 12 hours of night. That's the ancient Egyptians. So they invented the sundial with this stuff. So before 1300 BC, there's no such thing as time. There's no hours. There's no... This was invented by the Egyptians. Guess when the Old Testament Pentateuch was written? Before this. So guess what you don't have? You think there's hours? Nope. In any case, hours, minutes, seconds came from the Babylonians, base 60. Why base 60? Who can count to 60? 3 people.
The big guy.
The buyer, the seller, and the priest. So you buy or sell the priest. I go into a lot more detail on that, but I won't. But that's why we have base 60, and that was 300 BC. 300 BC. So guess what? Before 300 BC, there were no minutes and seconds. No time until then. And they used it, the minutes and seconds, to support temple sacrifices in Zoroastrianism. It's called Zoroastrianism today. This is well past the Old Testament period. So the Old Testament period, there's no indication or knowledge of time in terms of hours or set whatever. The concept in the time of the New Testament is difficult because the Hebrews keep time differently than the Greeks, and that's different than the Romans. And so depending on whether you're coming from a Roman or a Greek or a Hebrew point of view, you're going to keep time differently. That's why each is different. They had different ways of measuring the day and hours. There was a water clock in the temple. We won't really talk much about that in Acts, but there was a water clock in the temple, which is very interesting. About fire. Fire belonged to God, kindled in the temple, distributed to the people. So, if you're a Greek person today, you're worried about your hearth fire going out. Because ladies, you always banked the hearth fire before you left. Because guess where you couldn't light it from? Right, you'd have to go to the temple to get a hearth fire. So you'd have to go make a little pilgrimage to the temple to get your hearth fire relit. Once a year, the hearth fires were all put out in Greece, and they were relit in the temple at Olympus from a mirror, a shield, where they lit it with a shield going backwards. So they lit the fire from the sun, and then they would distribute the fire to every temple, which would then distribute it to every household in Greece. That was one of their festivals. And so, if you lit fire illicitly, what do you think would happen to you in the ancient world?
Did you die?
They kill you. Remember what happened to Abab and Adehu? Remember those guys in the Old Testament? What happened when they lit illicit fire before God? You got killed. Yeah. This is the way the ancient world viewed fire. And sacrifice. So, how did you eat? How did you get meat in the ancient world? The only way to get meat was sacrifice. There's no butchers. The only people that had butchers is the Hebrews. The reason the Hebrews had butchers is because, remember, they were separated from the temple, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, so they invented the idea of kosher butchering. But guess what? The rest of the world wasn't going along with that. So guess what you had to do if you were a Greek person? You'd have to go to the temple. Guess where the marketplace was next to? The temple. So when you took your kids, okay, let's say you're middle class, it means you can get out because you can't afford a guy to see him. So you've got a slave. There's 2 slaves for every person in Greece. So if you're a woman going out, you've got 2 slaves, maybe 1 male, 1 female, maybe 2 females, and each of your kids you have with you. So you got 6 kids. Each of them probably has 2 slaves too, and you're all going out. It's a game. And you're going out to the marketplace. And what are your kids screaming for? Meat! Mom, I want meat! Mom, I want meat! Mom, I want meat! Because they didn't eat meat but like 10 times a year. And they're smelling it because they're going by the temple province. Mom, I want meat so bad. That's why they ate a lot of fish. Because you didn't have to sacrifice fish. So the main diet in Athens is, guess what? Fish. Lots of fish. So the kids are begging for squid. But that's okay. Because in all ancient cultures, sacrifice, taking a life, was viewed as a big deal from the gods. Laws. I already talked a little about this. There was no means to protect women and children, etc., except strength and organization. The Roman law happened to be pretty free. Freest for women in history. But who's keeping it? Basically, it's comitatus. It's you are keeping it. So if somebody harms someone in your family, guess what you do? You take revenge. That's the way the Old Testament works. It's the way the concept of rule of law in that period. Religion, the way the world works, this is really important. I'm not going to drop this to the floor. That's why I used as the last example. But let's say I drop this. And what would happen to it? It'd fall to the floor, right? What caused it to fall to the floor? But now you're ancient Greek.
The gods.
The gods, that's right. The gods cause everything. The gods cause fire. The gods, matter of fact, every single person here is is what the Greeks would say you are chronos and pathos. You are pathos. You are fated. Because the gods cause everything, and you are fated to your existence. So it's not independent. It's not gravity. It's not power. It's not, force. It's the gods. And there are gods in everything. Now, the gods are fated by Chronos. So the gods don't even have free will. So in the Greek worldview, the ancient Greek worldview, no one has free will. Now that was changing. That was changing because of Greek rationalism. Greek rationalism started about 500 BC with the legal historical method, which we'll talk about next week big time. But you have the legal historical method 500 BC. You have about 400, 399 BC. Now, Socrates didn't invent logic, but we count 399, 400 BC, the death of Socrates, 399 BC, as the advent of logic in the world. And the Greeks invented logic. So I got the legal historical method, I got logic, and in about 300 to 200 BC, Aristotle invented the scientific method. So the Greeks invented the three ways of knowing truth in the world. Legal, historical, logic, and scientific method. There's only three ways of knowing truth. If you know another one, I want to know it, because there's no others. But when you start seeing that, what does that, when you start getting scientific method, legal, historical, and logic, what does that lead you away from? The idea that the gods are doing everything and the gods fated. So instead of, because I drop this, it's the gods, now I drop this, it's a natural phenomenon, right? If I throw it, it's not the gods making it go, it's the natural phenomena of the force. And logic lets me do math, which lets me do equations to even show that. Thus the Pythagorean theorem. So we've got to wrap our heads around this idea that the Greek rationalism and geometrically based thought, along with this Roman Hellenized rationalism, I'll tell you about this in a second, along with the Hebrew Torah law, is all infiltrating this culture, this Acts cultures that we're going to be talking about. Because Acts isn't just about Hebrew culture, right? It's also about Athens and about the Greek culture and the Greek places. And it's all Greek. I'm going to prove that to you in just a second. It's all Greek. Let's get to the all Greek. Let's talk about this. 400 BC to 0 CE. You got the Greek city-states, including Jerusalem, everything. Athens, the only democracy, constant war with each other and outside enemies, but the Greeks are not defeated or subjugated. You've got this invention of Greek philosophy. In their minds, it's not separate from theology, but it's beginning to separate them from paganism. So you got a direct separation from the pagan worldview. The death of Socrates, I mentioned that, that's a huge point. Alexander, okay, Alexander the Great. You guys remember this guy? 336 BC, takes the kingship of Macedonia. 323 BC, dies in Babylon of illness. Between that period, and I didn't make a picture, he captured the whole of the world. The known world was captured by Alexander. And the rest of the world around him did what? They want to be like him. Because if your gods let you capture the world, what was good about your gods? They're the ones, right? The world became Hellenized because of Alexander. Alexander the Great is what led to the Hellenization of the world. So everyone, remember that Koine Greek thing I was talking about at the beginning? Universal Greek? Guess what everybody in the world was speaking? Greek. The language of Jesus Christ was Greek. How do you know that? I can prove it. Language of Jesus Christ was Greek. Whenever Jesus Christ speaks something other than Greek, what do they always do?
Tell us what it is and translate it.
They translate it and tell us what it is. That would be dumb if he's speaking Aramaic. Why would you do that? Right? It only makes sense if he's speaking Greek all the time. Why is he speaking Greek all the time? That's the language of the people. Everybody's speaking Greek. Everybody's speaking, just like today, English. Even worse, everybody's speaking Greek. That's the world. The people adopted the Greek language, the Greek culture, Greek philosophy, Greek science, and Greek religion. You see temples. There's temples in Jerusalem to the Greek gods. There's an amphitheater. There's, I could go on and on. All because of Alexander. Alexander the Great brought the Greek religion, paganism, temples, oracles, mystery religion. When he died, his three generals separated the world into, it was Seculus, the Asia, the Seleucid Empire, Ptolemy, Egypt, and Antigonus. So, from 320-something BC, Egypt was what? Greek. Did you know Cleopatra was Greek? Cleopatra spoke Greek. She was Greek. Mark Antony found a Greek girl, right? It was a Greek girlfriend. She happened to live in Ptolemy's Egypt. So from this point on, the world of the Seleucid Empire, Egypt, and Macedon, of course, is in Greece. The world is Greek until they get wiped out. Let me see. How much time do I have for this? I'm going to talk a little bit about mystery religion. We'll get into that as we get into Acts. But mystery religion and mysterion is really an important concept in this period, because the Greek religion is turning from paganism to what we call mysterion. So I'll probably go into more detail, but mysterion is a really big deal. From mysterion, when you mix mysterion with Christianity, you get Gnosticism. You guys probably heard of Gnosticism. But anyone ever wonder where Gnosticism came from? Gnosticism is Christian mysterion, which is really interesting because Christianity is viewed as a mysterion in the ancient world, but that's a different thing. Socrates, let me get to this. The Romans, how did the Romans get in there? Well, we got the Greeks, right? Well, the Romans in 500 approximately BC established their republic. And between that, they didn't really become a world power until about 200 BC, and that's when they're having problems with Carthage. They have problems with Carthage, but during that period, they finally defeat Macedon. Macedonia, remember that? That's Greeks. So they defeat the Grecian peninsula with one of the great Greek empires that were separated from the Alexandrian thing. Then they defeated Syria in 190. Matter of fact, they were asked into Syria. They were asked into Syria by the Jews to fight against the Greeks, right? And then the Third Punic War, in which Carthage was raised. And don't anybody tell me that war doesn't solve anything, because war solved a serious problem for the Greeks, or for the Romans. They were attacked by the Carthaginians 3 times, and they got really tired of it. So the last time, what did they do? They totally wiped out Carthage and salted the ground. There's nobody alive today, that we know is Carthaginian, because the Romans got tired of them fighting them. And so they solved that problem. Ain't no Carthaginians around. In 49 BC, that's when Caesar crossed Rubicon. That was the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire, Roman Republic, because that began the Roman Empire, which is, by the way, our period, right? So, following Alexander's death, I told you, the Seleucid Empire, this controlled the Levant, or Syria, back and forth with the Greek Egypt. The Seleucid Empire was in control, 200 BCE. The goal was Hellenization. You notice this is the same time that Macedon was already defeated, right, by the Romans. And what we have is Jason the high priest. Jason the high priest, in 175 BC, this is the Levant, Syria area. This is Jerusalem, Judea. Jason was the high priest, the political controlling influence. Antiochus IV was the head of the Seleucid Empire. Jason was open to Hellenization. Remember, he built gymnasiums, which is a big deal. I'll talk about it later maybe. Encouraged the priests to go to sporting events, which is a big deal. But then he rebelled, because he thought he could win, because guess who was nipping at the undercarriage of the Seleucid Empire? The Romans. So Jason thought he could win this one, and he didn't. He got busted. And that's when Antiochus began a heavy program of Hellenization with the Jews. This is the abomination of desolation, guys. Because in the Apocrypha, remember the Apocrypha class I taught? Antiochus defiled the temple with swine, didn't allow circumcision. I'll explain this later. Prevented temple worship. He built an altar to Zeus in the temple. I don't have time to go into great details of that, but this is what happened. That was the abomination of desolation, according to the rabbis and according to the New Testament, by the way, which precipitated the Maccabean revolt in 167 BC. The reason the Maccabean revolt is important to us is because it was started by this Matthias and his sons. It's the beginning of the Hasmonean Empire, the Hasmonean dynasty, in which the Jews became their own nation with the help of the Romans against the Greeks. But they were already Hellenized. They were already speaking Greek. They were already big-time Hellenized. They were successful because the Romans helped them and also were eating away at the Seleucid Empire. So anyway, what's really important is this. According to Josephus, Simon, that is, he was proclaimed by the people to be the leader and high priest. The king and high priest. Anybody know what that means to a Jewish person?
Messiah.
He's a Messiah. And so Josephus tells us Simon was not of the line of Aaron, so therefore he couldn't be high priest. And he was not of the line of David, so therefore he couldn't be the king. But he was proclaimed to be the high priest and king of Israel. And that is aligned with Hasmoneans through Simon. This is really important because out of the proclamation of Simon as king and high priest that caused the split into the 4 Jewish sects. And we will learn there are 5 Jewish sects in Acts. But the 5th Jewish sect, Teen Hodos, we have to wait for it to show up. So in this period, because in about 167 BC, Simon was proclaimed high priest and king, we have the splitting of the Essenes, Pharisees, Sadducees, and Zealots. This is very important. Very important. You guys ever wonder where these guys came from? You just popped up out of history? Just magic, right? The Essenes, Jewish tradition, may have been started by the exiled priest prior to Jonathan, strictly interpreted the law, rejected many elements of the Jewish tradition. They separated themselves from sacrificial law. They believed in the resurrection of the dead. They believed in a reward and punishment of the afterlife. That's the Essenes. Sound like somebody else we know? A lot of Christian thought in there, eh? Early Christian thought. The Pharisees, like the Essenes, disagree with the Hasmoneans as high priest and king. They began the oral Torah. And I'm going to talk about oral Torah and Torah. They started the oral Torah. They wrote it down. The oral Torah existed, but they really believed in it. They advocated greater leniency and punishments than the Sadducees. They believed in resurrection. They believed in eternal punishment for the wicked. They were well supported by the people. And Paul, was a Pharisee. The Sadducees held only Torah as the basis for law. No resurrection, no punishment after death, and generally controlled the temple and the high priest. These are those groups. The Zealots are late, 6 BC, founded by Judas of Galilee. Basically, they're Pharisees with an extremist bent. They're violently opposed to Romans and Hellenization. They fought big fights. Now, you got the culture, you got some of the history leading up, we got a little bit about the language, right? We can start thinking about this Acts thing, because that's the question we're going to ask in this class. The cultural framework for the early church, the incorporation of the Logos and the Telos, the argument, the message of the early church, the first interaction of Christianity with cultures other than the Hebrew and Hellenistic cultures, the basis of the future interaction of the church that is in time, and the origin of the concept of church to begin with, because they didn't call it church. Wasn't called church hardly at all. So, what we're going to do is we're going to try to find an understanding of Acts that allows us to understand the basis for the original Christian culture, because what we've been talking about is what? Greek culture, right? Ooh, guess what? I'm going to argue there's not much difference. Not in the early period, anyway. Modern cultures are different. Ancient cultures are different. If we can understand the culture, if we can understand the literature, if we can understand the history, guess what we can understand? Understand a document like this. It's a really cool document because it's Greek. It's ancient. So anyway, next time we'll look at the historical legal evaluation of the Acts. We'll look at its historical validity and veracity, how it came to us, and how it was viewed in history. So get your minds perked up. We'll talk about that next week. Thanks.